This morning, we're going to speak about and learn together about two very, very Jewish topics, two very, very Jewish things. And these two things are, first, food, and second, time. Okay, so food and time. You know, I think we're all thinking about food and time as related to the bagels in the social hall, but you know, this is a little bit of a different topic. So as many of you already know, I have family that's Jewish and also family that's not Jewish, and that I realized this week that makes me think about Jewish life in a kind of a different and particular way from people who don't have interfaith families. Earlier this week, I was at the home of one of my family members who isn't Jewish, and it was lunchtime, and we were grabbing some of whatever's around for a quick lunch. And so this is pretty typical, but I had a cream cheese sandwich. It was delicious. And the other person I was with had leftovers. And so I was curious. It was on the plate, and I'm like, what is that? And they recently had dinner with their in-laws, and this was the leftovers. I don't want to talk about this in great deal from the Bima, but let's just say those leftovers were definitely not kosher. And so when you keep kosher and you encounter non-kosher food like right in front of you, I don't know if anyone can relate to this, but it's a little bit alarming. It's like, oh, okay, that's what it is. And I say this as someone who has not kept kosher my whole life. You just get used to it, to following these particular food customs, and you forget that not everyone else does this. And kashrut creates a community. It creates a world. Kashrut makes us Jewish. And even if some of us, might not keep kosher all the time, just knowing what kosher is makes us Jewish. So, okay, the leftovers weren't kosher, but then I was thinking about it, and I realized that when that part of the family got together for dinner, it wasn't a Shabbat dinner. It was a dinner on the weekend. It was a time when people weren't working, so okay, makes sense. But their time of gathering didn't have anything to do with a spiritual holiday of rest. It didn't have anything to do with what other holidays they celebrate. It didn't have anything to do with who their ancestors are. It didn't have anything to do with their obligations to the world, to one another, and to God. And I thought, wow, Jewish time is so different. Jewish time connects us to culture and spirituality. It connects us to our global community. And it connects us to generations upon generations of ancestors, all the way back to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah. It connects us to our future descendants. And it connects us to obligations to each other, to the world, and to God. And so these are the mitzvot, the stuff we do as Jews. There's so much to be said about Jewish time. It's probably my favorite topic. This has really started years ago when I read the book Seasons of Our Joy by Rabbi Arthur Waskow, and I've talked about that book many times from this bima, and I'm sure I will many times in the future. If you were at the Shabbaton, the rabbi's topic was time, and that was a lot of fun. And today, we had a lot of fun. It was great. And today, with our 3 Torah scrolls, actually, we're beginning a cycle of Jewish time that we don't often pay so much attention to. It's called the Arba Parshiot, the 4 sections or 4 parshas, and it's the time of year that's marked leading up to Purim and Pesach. So we're thinking about Hamantashen and matzah at the same time. Speaking of food, it's quite a combination, Hamantashen and matzah. And so this cycle of Arba Parshiot, the cycle of Jewish time, it starts today with Shabbat Shekalim. There are 3 more, making 4 total. Next up is Shabbat Zachor, that's next week. And then a few weeks after that, we have Shabbat Parah, and finally Shabbat HaChodesh. And so we'll talk about those other 3 in details later. But one thing all these 4 have in common is that they're marked with a special maftir reading, usually from a different Torah scroll. And so if a community happens to only have 1 Sefer Torah, you can make that work. There's a little bit more scrolling involved, so it's a lot easier with 2. And so you might be asking right now, why do we have 3 Sifrei Torah today? So we had 1 scroll, the first one, for the regularly scheduled Torah reading, the second one for the reading for Rosh Chodesh, the new month, because today is Rosh Chodesh Adar, and then our 3rd scroll was for Shabbat Shekalim. Now, a 3-scroll Torah Shabbat is highly, highly unusual. This is only the 2nd time I've ever experienced it personally, and I go to shul fairly frequently, so consider yourselves lucky today. This is a special Jewish calendar surprise. It's a hidden treasure in time. It's an extra special Shabbat Shekalim coinciding with Rosh Chodesh Adar. So Shabbat Shekalim, what is it all about? As I was mentioning before, it's the first in our cycle of Arba Parshiyot, 4 special sections, 4 special readings leading up to Purim and Pesach. And so this is the first one. Most simply, what it means is we're getting ready for Purim, which is always exciting. And it gets us ready for Purim, this reading for Shabbat Shekalim, by reminding us of one of the 4 mitzvot of Purim. Okay, so you might be thinking, wait a second, Purim has mitzvot? I thought Purim was fun. It involves dancing and drinking, cantor's band. It's the same thing as Simchat Torah, right? Well, not exactly. Purim not only has 4 mitzvot, but these 4 mitzvot are fun. A mitzvah is an obligation, but it's also a connection. It connects us to our fellow Jews, including, of course, our fellow Jews in Israel, to our past and our future, and to God. And so what are the 4 mitzvot of Purim, and which one connects us to Shabbat Shekalim? So speaking of food, the first mitzvah of Purim we probably think about is mishloach manot. We send gifts to friends, and these gifts have to be edible. I feel like, I don't know if it's traditionally or stereotypically, but it's usually a hamantashen and like a little fruit, like a tangerine, because it's supposed to be 2 different types of foods. And hamantashen are practically mandatory. I have to say, a couple years ago, I taught 9th grade, and the moment where I was like the most disappointed in the future of the Jewish people is when all the kids said, my favorite hamantashen is chocolate. I'm like, that is not a flavor. This is there's the red ones or the orange ones. There's the apricot or the cherry or raspberry or whatever it is. Chocolate, kids these days. So moving on to our second mitzvah of Purim, we probably have an idea of this one. It's Mikrat Megillah, the reading of the book of Esther from a special kosher scroll. This kosher scroll is not exactly like a Sefer Torah, but it's similar. And so we know, because we come to shul on Shabbat, that on Shabbat, we're supposed to listen to the Torah reading and we're supposed to pay attention. But on Purim, with Megillat Esther, the book of Esther, it's a whole other level. Technically, we're supposed to read it ourselves. Whoa. So knowing that not everybody can do that, if you can't do that, the next best thing is you're supposed to have your own kosher scroll and follow along. Now, if you've ever shopped for a Megillat Esther, those scrolls are not cheap. So if you can't have your own scroll, you must hear every word read aloud. You really have to pay attention to every single word. And so this year, Marla Knoll, Rabbi Karen Eisenberg, Yoel Cohen, and I will read for our community in the evening so everyone can do this mitzvah. As the rabbi said, teamwork makes the dream work. It'll be very exciting. Now, the third mitzvah of Purim, this is one that you might not have heard of before. I was actually having a conversation with some people about this in class earlier this week. The one you might not have heard of before is the Purim Seudah, the special Purim meal. And this mitzvah, this special meal, is actually a bit different than what you'd usually think of when you think of a special Jewish meal, because usually our special meals are at night. But this one isn't. Purim is really unusual because the evening of Purim isn't focused on food at all, which is like, whoa, we're not focused on food? What's going on? Well, we're supposed to fast the day before Purim. It's the fast of Esther. Fasting, the practice of abstaining from food or drink for a specific limited period of time, it's a powerful spiritual practice, but it's not easy to do, and often people have to refrain from fasting for medical reasons. So after fasting for, like Esther, all day, because Esther fasted when she was getting ready to reveal that she was Jewish in the story of Esther, we must go without delay, finishing our fast into the reading of the book of Esther. And so we spend Purim night finishing our fast. We have our special Purim meal, our Seudat Mitzvah, on Purim day. Often in the afternoon, but I know when I was a student at the Ziegler School of Rabbinic Studies, we had a Purim brunch, which is a little bit less traditional in general, but was very traditional for us in school and always a lot of fun. So now our fourth mitzvah. This is our Shabbat Shekalim mitzvah, the mitzvah that connects us to our Torah reading today, the first of the Arba Parshiyot, the 4 special sections. And this mitzvah is matanot le'evyonim, gifts to the poor. You might have been paying close attention to the third Torah reading, the reading from the third scroll, and now you're asking, well, the Torah reading had nothing to do with the poor, so what's the connection? The connection is gifts of value, gifts of money usually, but really any gift of value. Our special Torah reading talks about in the times of the tabernacle, each person who was being counted for the census had to make a specific monetary donation of 1/2 shekel. The amount of this donation was the same whether the individual giving it was rich or poor. Now, the Purim mitzvah of gifts to the poor, matzanot le'evyonim, similarly, it's an obligation for all of us, no matter how much money we have. We can fulfill this mitzvah on the day of Purim by giving 2 gifts, 1 gift to each person in need. We can give any gifts of value. We can give money, we can give food or drink or clothing, as long as they're gifts of value given to people in need specifically on the day of Purim itself. So our connection between Shabbat Shekalim and our mitzvah of gifts to the poor is gifts of value. And that actually brings us back to the beginning of our Parashat Terumah, which instructs us to give gifts. As we read, God spoke to Moses saying, "Tell the Israelite people to bring me gifts. You shall accept gifts from me from every person whose heart so moves them." Our Parashat teaches us that gifts are an important love language. On today, the Shabbat Shekalim, may we remember and be reminded of the 4 mitzvot of Purim, particularly the gift of giving gifts of value to the poor. This year, may our gifts to those in need be gifts given both to do a mitzvah and because our heart so moves us to give in love. Shabbat Shalom.